Welcome everybody to a brand new break-in world of Warcraft. I think this is episode 4.
Episode number 4, and
Yes.
you should probably already know everybody by now. You've probably seen them in Discord and chats. Big Theory Crafters, Big Brains.
On YouTube, on Twitch.
And yeah, we totally recommend you guys check all the previous episodes that we had. The topics are still relevant, and you might be getting a little bit of insight. But with that out of the way, let's kick it off because we do have some burning topics to cover today.
I think the talk of the week definitely was the new Affix announced, and we had updates and changes, and obviously the boys that are on the podcast today have a lot of things to say. Hey, I made a rhyme. How about that? I'm a rapper now. God damn, I'm so good. So let's just kick it off. We're going to talk about the new Affix with the latest changes. Obviously, there's some specific spicy points to touch upon, CDR and all that. But we'll get to it. So I don't know. We'll keep the tradition here. We'll start it off with Guiltyas because he finally finished his room and he's anxious to talk about the new Affix. So Guiltyas, first thoughts on what's happening here with this M+ new Affix.
I think the Affix is a cool concept. It's when Affix and M+ have been good is because they've been like Kiss Curse. They've like enabled you to do things that you couldn't do otherwise by suffering through something. So like the Nile Author Affix was very similar. It enabled skips when you didn't have a rogue. That was cool. This Affix has kind of some of that, but it's kind of done worse than Nile Author. So there's some cool stuff about it, but it's definitely awkwardly tuned.
For anybody who doesn't know what the Affix is, can you go quickly over it and just explain it really briefly?
Sure. So in certain packs around the dungeon, there are 3 relics, they're called. They're like boxes, pylons, pillars. And when you kill, you have to kill them, obviously. And the one that you kill first will give you a buff. Obviously, each of them do something to you while they're alive. So I think one of them does damage to you while it's alive. The other reduces damage of mobs around them. The other gives mobs around them haste. And then the one you kill first will give you a buff based on which one.
Well, it doesn't give you a buff. It spawns a big guy that you kill.
Yeah.
And then once you kill the big guy, then you get the buff. Yeah. So it's a little
that only happens after you kill all 3.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's kind of like Infested that we had in some respect, in that they have something attached to packs in the dungeon. Except now when you
tackle the relics is what dictates what buff you get out of it effectively.
Mm-hmm. And there are 3 options, like you mentioned. So.
Yeah, it's haste, CDR, or a stealth.
A stealth.
Correctly. So I think they added
damage reduction.
Yeah, and the other one is CDR plus mana reduction.
Yeah, so it's 15% damage reduction, auto stealth when you're not in combat for 20 seconds, cooldown reduction to 200%, and restores 10% HP and mana every second. That's only a 10-second duration buff, though. And the haste one is a 15% haste buff.
It also does damage now.
Yeah.
Like drops random damage on things you're targeting.
Yeah. I think it also, or heals a friendly target, I think, as well.
Yeah.
Pulbik, since you've started explaining on it, what's your thoughts on it so far? What do you think?
I definitely like the idea of Kiss Curse affixes. I think, I don't know if I totally like the idea of like they're very small buffs, right? So you really have to, and some people might like this, like you're gonna have to plan your routes pretty, specifically around, okay, we're gonna kill this here, get this buff, and then you get it for 10 seconds, 20 seconds. So like right after you kill that big mob that might be trucking your tank, you immediately have to go to the next pack. So that might be a little weird. I think I'd prefer it if it was like an item that you got that you could choose when to use it, like individually as a character, or like some extra action button type thing. So I think that part's a little wonky, but so it could be better. But I think because of the kind of the strictness of how it works, I think it might limit your options a bit more than you want. I'm also afraid that everyone's just going to always pick the haste buff every single time, like especially in pugs, and just forego the other 2 options. Even though the healers really want the one that gives HP and mana every second, I think everyone's just going to pick haste every time. So I think that's one of my biggest concerns. But yeah.
Fair enough. How about you, Mandl? What do you think of this? I know you gave an example of, great in theory, pretty bad in implementation. Or
you're even stealing my thunder on this one?
No, man. Wow. I just read it, man. It's all love.
I mean, at least in my opinion, there's a lot to unpack on the Affix. And like in theory, it's a great idea. but it's going to be led down by a lot of implementation details that will basically screw over pugs. So from a basic perspective, the fact that the relics themselves are hostile in the groups means that you effectively have to deal with 3 additional mobs, and also they prevent some of the skips that you are able to do right now in Season 2. So for instance, if you go in Mists on PTR, you'll see that the pack that you normally, where you normally CC one of the mobs and walk past, you can no longer skip this. You actually need to Shroud, Invis, or Warlock Gateway through it. There is no other option. So,
which I don't mind. I mean, it does,
It
changing routes from season to season, changing routes, I think is okay. But
that's one of the things that's usually a really good thing when they do it. With them, to actually switch up from the routes that everyone's been doing for like a year.
Yes, I agree. But this pack is the hardest pack in the instance by quite a very large margin.
Yeah, and what you're saying, it's already hard, and they've effectively added 3 buffs to it to make it even harder, right? Yeah. And they're not insignificant by any means. Like they severely make the pack hurt. It's like way worse than Infested was, I think.
Yep. When we did the mists on PTR, we ended up spawning the gunny guy, the Vi relic mob. Halfway
That's the haze buff guy?
That's the haze buff guy, yeah. For those who haven't done the Affix, the 3 mobs that spawn, so when you kill the 3 relics, you get a mob that spawns based on the first one that you killed. And the mobs are deterministic. So there's a Vi relic, there's an relic, and there's a WoW relic. And each one of them spawns a different mob. The easiest one out of all of them is the WoW relic mob, which basically just melees the tank for a tiny bit and has a cast every 12 seconds that you need to kick. Like, big deal kind of thing. Then the mob is basically a tank buster kind of guy, where I think it's also every 12 seconds, there's a tank buster cast that you just need to basically, your tank has to put a CD up of some sort to mitigate some of it.
I think it stacks too, right? So you have to.
It does stack, yeah.
Somewhat fast. Yeah.
Yes. The real problem is the third one, which is the Vi relic, which is the haste buff. Right now, it was the haste buff. It was the cooldown reduction buff on the previous build of PTR.
I think it's haste now, yeah.
It's haste now, and it's going to be a real problem because it's the most dangerous of the 3 mobs. So the guy basically shoots randomly at people in the group, and it does a significant amount of damage. And every 10 seconds or so, he teleports to a certain place and lines up a big, not very visible line between himself and the person. And if you're in it, you basically die.
And he jumps like kind of far too. So like the weird part about him, it's yes, he's the one that you want in terms of probably like DPS output. He's also going to be like one of the hardest to kill. And when he teleports around, I mean, he's not playing around. Like he will go halfway across the room if he needs to. So you have to like actually prep for that, spawn him in a good spot, and potentially kill more packs than you would have otherwise, or differently.
The other thing as well is each of the relics, you have to deal with them first, because the relics are also doing stuff.
Yes,
before you do them, because you've got like one relic that's firing randomly, like stealing damage. One buffs them with haste, I think.
Yep,
and the other one reduces the damage that they take. So you do the relics first. So you've got one of these big robots doing these mechanics for the duration of the pack.
Yep. So when we did the mist on PTR, we accidentally killed the wrong relic. Because that's another problem with the Affix. The relics have very little health, and they take full AoE damage equally. So it's very easy to accidentally kill one of them and end up with the wrong mob and the wrong buff by accident. So we did that on...
You want to kill one first, like just open on it.
Yeah. Like you fully open on it, but it's going to be a nightmare in pugs. Because pugs will see a lot of health bars and go, I need to pad. So this actually happened to us because we had an Outlaw Rogue, and the Outlaw Rogue decided to kill the right relic, but ended up critting on everything else but the right relic. So we ended up with Vi in a pack with the Bowbreaker, 2 Cleaver guys, and a caster. And the shooty block, the Vi guy, ended up spawning while the Bowbreaker was doing the AoE. 3 people died.
That's also considering that all these relics are there, because there's 3 whenever these are in a pack. There are, while it doesn't affect everyone anymore, there are still some capped AoEs going on.
Yes.
And those can fire onto those relics, which is also obviously reducing the damage that you do to the other packs, the other mobs in the pack, and they eat up other damage that can be way overkill in some cases.
Yep.
Like Outlaw is a good example. Enhancement now is like very relevant with its new kit. These are things that are quite irritating, and maybe they should be more like explosive.
Yeah, because like Shadow's new tier set is just more mindless AoE. Like it's not, I can't control what it hits, right? And that's how my AoE works already, as does probably almost every other person's AoE. So yeah, making it work like explosive would be cool. Or they could also go the other way, right? And just say, okay, the relics are now set in stone. There's only one relic per pack, like just straight up. Kind of like it is with Tormented, where like, yeah, the mobs are in set space, like positions in the dungeon. They could do the same thing with the relics, right? And just, force you to get the haste guy here, force you to get the CDR one on this pack, and so on and so forth. And then it doesn't really matter, right?
In terms of the relic diversity in dungeons, and having done all of the dungeons, it feels like they put the relics in the packs that you normally don't kill. Which is, it's a really good idea, but it's a terrible execution problem. Because there's a reason people don't kill those packs. Like, take a good example, again, in Mists, the left villager pack. The one that you always just walk past because the other villager pack is easier. You're not going to change it just because there's 3 relics, because suddenly the pack got harder.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the other point I'd like to make is that, like, while Kiss Curse affixes can be fun, I think making dungeons harder is really, I don't know, you're kind of maybe biting off more than you can chew, because it doesn't always make it more fun.
Yeah.
And I think that's the challenge with something like this is, I think getting buffs to your character and like being able to do higher keys, that sounds pretty fun. But making the key harder in the process might disincentivize players from even trying Mythic Plus in the first place.
Yep. And then to top it all off, there's the problem with the strength of the buffs, which you've hinted at already, where the biggest point is actually the mana regen. So the haste buff is valuable for everybody, and the extra proc damage is valuable for everybody, even your healer. The CDR buff is not really valuable, but your healer wants it because it's a full drink in 10 seconds. So it means that they don't have to sit around for 15 seconds to drink.
Yeah, it's just 100, straight up 100% of your mana and health comes back in 10 seconds, basically.
Yeah.
I'd push back on that the CDR isn't valuable. I think it's wildly different how valuable it is depending on the people in your group. And that's really dangerous. So like when you look at some classes and some spec, they already have built-in CDR. They don't need any more because they are fully functional without any. And then you have other specs, like take an example, like Panthea Demon Hunters are going to be really popular next patch. Pressing meta, massive AoE burst, but it's not available very frequently. So if you get CDR on them, that could alter your routing and how much AoE that Demon Hunter could do. But if they're the only one that wants CDR in the whole group and everyone else wants hate, suddenly you've got a conflict. Well, I want this relic and I want this. Which one do we pick?
Who can kill it faster?
That's what it's going to come down to.
Oh man, I see myself.
I mean, it's not even that much CDR, right? It's like 30 seconds of CDR.
But
200%
CDR is
for 10 seconds, right?
Yeah, so you get 30 seconds off.
30?
So you get an extra 30 seconds off your 4-minute CD.
But it can, in some cases, it's super impactful. Like Katha and I were messing around on it, and
like maybe if it allows you, maybe
if it breaks
double Vesper, double bond in one pull.
If it breakpoints you into being able to press it at the start of a pack versus not, with something like Panthea Havoc, that's an enormous difference because of just how much damage AoE Simple Brand does.
But I think what we're saying is because it's static 30 seconds, right? It could be really good for people with low CDs, but like with meta, 30 seconds off meta, not that it's a drop in the bucket, but it's much less impactful than, say, anyone with a 1 minute or 2 minute cooldown, because then you're just firing that sucker more often. Since it's not a percent of your cooldown off, it's here's 30 seconds off.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
I mean, Wordup's point is about like hitting a breakpoint. Like maybe you suddenly have meta for a pack you needed it for, which is like fair enough.
The real strength on that one is for anybody Kyrian with strong Covenant abilities. Because you combine the CDR, you combine Mechanicos, and you end up being able to press the button 2 or 3 times per pack.
Right, and then you also get all like the soulbind buffs that you get for pressing that button more often. Right. Yeah.
So you guys mentioned that this can be The Kiss Curse mechanic kind of reminds me of, obviously we had Kiss Curse mechanic as well, but it kind of reminds me a little bit of the 9.0 mechanic, where as there are a certain time people were just ignoring the things because we're just taking way too long, because we're talking about, hierarchies and hierarchies. Since the buffs are so small, do you guys think that, is there a drawback for ignoring these boxes, or do they stack up to like a boss buff and in the end, like, tormentors and stuff?
I don't think there's any punishment for skipping, right? Like there's no like...
Yeah. No,
it's the relics are worth 0%. They don't do anything if you don't kill them. There's an interesting bug on PTR in that the relics are not linked. So you can technically bug yourself. Yeah. So you can kill 2 relics without killing the third one. And perfect. Then decide, I'll come back to it, kill the relic, get an extra mob, and profit.
That'll be interesting.
I'm curious what Panthea thinks of all this. Panthea, you've been awfully quiet, man. Do you have any ideas on this?
I've not done any Mythic Plus on PTR, so.
Oh yeah, I forgot you only rated on the PTR. Still, we'll get to rating hopefully on the.
But it was mentioned earlier about target caps. Quite a lot of tanks are target caps still. So if you take Protection Paladin, for example, you go in with Avenger Shield. You don't know where it's going to bounce. Could kill the wrong relic.
Yep.
Yeah, I think Pulbik mentioned this as well. Like specs like Shadow. And I can think of a couple of other ones as well, like where you cannot really control your AoE damage. It might as well, end up in a big mess. And the thing with the CDR...
You could just not AoE. That's an option.
Yeah, but it's so fun.
Yeah.
Like, I think what my experience was, obviously Panthea has become really good for enhancement. And when I did any of these dungeons, you obviously fire Chain Harvest immediately because it's got such a low cooldown with all of the things going on. Chain Harvest does like 2/3 to 3/4 of a relic's health if it crits, and it probably will crit because you're at like 70% crit, and that's incredibly volatile because that could be any single like sliver of extra AoE on any of them, and that one's dead. And that happened so many times that I just couldn't press it.
Yeah, you combine that with a Divine Toll from a Proc Paladin, and you've got relics dead galore.
We've had this more than once while testing, and it really wasn't fun. There's another thing with it, is that the buff is applied when the automat dies, and in 2 of the cases, the buff is either not long enough, or it happens at the wrong time. So, for instance, the 15% damage reduction would be great if it was a minute long, because then you would be able to use it for something.
Or if you could control it, right? Like if it was like an item or a button you could press rather than just getting it.
Yeah, because a ton of mechanics in Mythic Plus are just burst damage either on the group or on the tank, and it comes sort of predictably. So if you had that, for instance, on a boss, and you could trigger it at will, having a case where you need a cooldown for something, I'm thinking like third boss of Sanguine Depths, for instance, which does a ludicrous amount of AoE damage on the group. If you had that button available, as opposed to having to kill the automat exactly the right time and RNG a win, basically, would be like so much healthier.
And I think it'd be a lot of fun, right? Like you have 3 unique items in your bag, like you can only get one of them, and your group is like, okay, we know the last boss of this tyrannical dungeon is like really hard, so we're gonna kill an extra pack to get an extra buff, right? Just to like save up that slot and so we can get more power for the last boss because we know it's hard. Right now, you can't really do that except for one buff on the opener of that boss, which, I don't know, feels pretty lame to me. And it's only going to be for 10 seconds, 20 seconds. So I'm not sure. It might just be like someone mentioned, people just might just start skipping them because they're not fun.
Yeah. It's going to have the same problem as Infested, where you're just going to play Metal Gear in Mythic Plus.
The idea behind it all is quite good though, where you would pick the relic contingent with what you need coming up. Like that concept is really good, and it would create like some clever pathing if they were better designed, or like most importantly the trigger mechanic was better designed, or they had a bit better parity.
So to fix this, like the numerous issues that the Affix could pose when it comes to its implementation, Pulbik mentioned a a way of controlling the buff, either by an extra action bar. I'm thinking, Torghast empowerment thing. It can show up on your screen, the kind of stuff, and you can just activate it when you need it, or you activate it for a group or an item in your bag. Although I can see issues with my bags; they're always full. This is in the sense of controlling the buff. When it comes to what I mentioned, the balance of the buffs, because then you might end up just picking the haste all the time. And what do you guys see as a solution to let's say the balance between the buffs? So it might be worth picking A now, B later, C sometime after that, or something like that, instead of just picking B all the time.
Before we talk about solutions, let's talk about the real problem, because haste or CDR is not that important in the grand scheme of things. The grand scheme of things is everybody will hate healers and healers will hate everybody.
So, as an esoteric fix to it, instead of the relics being immediately active when you pull a pack, they could be interactable like the torment orbs in the current effect. You turn them on, and the person that turns them on gets an extra action button going forward. So you can decide to only turn one on, or you could turn two on, and then you've now got two group buffs going into the next one, depending on when you activate it. Or you could turn all three on, and then you get 3 buffs.
If you do that, making the relics not be a choice would actually be nice. So that, for instance, in pack number 1, you have the haste buff or the haste relic, and you can kill it and then pick it up and use it whenever you want.
Yeah, I mean, they could also make it like infested, where like infested, the mobs like were just normal mobs, right? So like they didn't die in 1 second or 2 seconds if you targeted them. So you could give that one negative buff to the entire pack until you actually kill that one mob that gives you that buff. So they could do something like that again, and then again control which buffs are attached to which pack. Also, again, if you make it an item or a buff and you give it like a unique cap of 1, you could be incentivized to do all 3, because stacking 2 wouldn't do anything. You could chain them together, I guess, but so I think either one could solve it too.
Because if you could, say, get all 3 buffs as an extra action button from one pack, but you have a really difficult roll after, that means that the damage reduction one, as a group defensive, isn't something that would be disincentivized anymore. It would be, well, we take the extra effort to make this pack really hard, but then down the line, we now have a group DR button, which we can now aggressively pull and make the time. Like, that creates a really interesting dynamic. But
they could also make it work like the Kyrian relics in the Necrotic Wake, where like you have a bunch of extra action buttons and you can chain them together, right? If you get multiple of them, so they already have this tech, right?
I do think there's potentially an issue with like that many extra action buttons working in like dungeons and stuff, but they can probably work around that.
Yeah, well, in those cases, it could be an item as well, like how it works, because then there's just 3 keybinds and you just chuck it out. But the idea of having more control over it is much more interesting.
I agree. It should be looked at in that terms. And they should really tune, like, I know we're complaining about the healers going to make everyone hate them and everyone's going to hate healers, but they should tune them more significantly. Like, the stealth one is clearly, like, it has a situation where this is going to be the best option. Because...
yeah, like, very specific,
Yeah, like, there's going to be packs which you want to skip. Like, great, that's just going to be that. It doesn't need to be tuned, really. It's just a sharp situation thing.
And yet, that one forces your tank to endure 2+ minutes of the tank buster, dude, for 20 seconds after the dude dies, which means that it needs to die last.
You overvalue how much I care about my tank suffering.
Bearing in mind, we already have a precedent for things like the damage reduction relic, which is Tormented. Like, when you look at Tormented routing, how many times do people just avoid Sagadon completely?
Yep.
Because we don't need any more DR. We're all fine. The tank just gets to suffer. He has to deal with it. Sorry. Like,
right, but it's not just DR.
Well,
the more relevant part is the stealth.
No, the damage reduction one, the stealth bit, you can use it to skip things, but the duration, that's going to be like entirely route independent. But the DR part is something that a tank could like potentially make a lot of use of. But you never want to use that one.
It's never going to be used for the tank. If it gets used, it's going to be for the party, for an AoE mechanic.
Yeah.
That's why people kill Sogodon in Mythic Plus. Like, whenever they kill it, it's not because the last boss is too dangerous. It's simply because the effective health on the entire party from the shield is way more valuable.
And that's why I think like comparing these guys and balancing DR, CDR, and haste is always going to be kind of a crapshoot, especially and very comp dependent, right? Which is why I think I'd prefer they actually somewhat remove the choice entirely by either, giving you all the buffs as like use it when you want to, they're static, or making it kind of like Tormented, where like this pack gives you this buff, period, right? That way, like by removing the choice, you give players more choice, if that makes sense, rather than like waiting for Dradnos or whoever to tell everyone which ones to get where, which isn't fun in my opinion. Even though it's right, nothing wrong with that, but that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, because like you turn a 2-dimensional, very variable choice into a 1-dimensional, very fun choice.
It kind of feels a little bit like this is not the Affix to have at the end of the cycle, because them trying to force up the routes that have already been very firmly like set in stone and forcing you to do packs and harder that they don't want. If it was at the beginning, people don't know what the hardest pack is. They can play around. There's more of a reason to like experiment with it. Whereas putting it at the end, now you're trying to shift it up in the worst way possible. Because
I don't know. I haven't done Dungeons in forever though.
Well, okay.
I don't know.
In my experience, it also comes after, like, this is arguably the weakest of the Kiss Curse of the three, this expansion.
Yep.
But I think it has good potential, though, is what we're saying. Like, I think
it's a really good idea. Like, in concept, it's a really good idea. It just needs more polish.
Yeah,
I think
putting it on the whiteboard, fantastic idea. Like, whoever came up with it, really good. It just isn't quite there.
It definitely needs more. I think it's better than Tormented, if I'm honest. Tormented was fun for the first time you did each dungeon, and after that, it was
boring after that.
This is going to be the same, though. Like, the routes are going to basically stagnate, and that's it. Like, instead of having a Tormented mob basically once a dungeon, you're going to have mini-bosses like 5 times a dungeon.
I mean, I don't know if I agree. I think there's going to be significantly more variance or creativity in terms of personal routes.
I think there could be, right? Because there's only 4 Tormented guys, right? And now there's how many of these packs are in a dungeon,
Tormented didn't impact how you routed at all in most dungeons.
I disagree solely off the purpose that, like, Tormented, they knew that it was going to get stale, and they kept rotating the locations with affixes. So that's them actively trying to, like, alter the routing that people do. This one, that's highly unlikely to happen, or at least from what I've seen with different affixes in the keys. They're in locked positions. It will be a solved affix.
I mean, you can say they rotated them around, but it didn't really impact how you routed because they were just along the route you took anyway. The only dungeon where you really changed around how you routed
other side
was DOS. Yeah, DOS is the big one.
TOP
Other dungeons, they were just somewhere. You ran into them eventually. It didn't.
I disagree with that. Like, in TOP, you played around it as well. Yeah, and sure. Like, you didn't play around it that much, but that's also because the dungeons are so linear to start with.
Sure, yeah. There's definitely a degree of it being the dungeon problem. But I think this Affix is significantly more likely to have, like, there'll be certain packs which people just skip. Like, they do the stealth skip and other people don't.
Judging by what I've seen on PTR, I don't think the routes are going to change that much. Like, as I said, they put the relics in some of the hardest packs in the dungeon, making them even harder. It's like people will just skip the affix wherever they can.
I mean, if that is the case, then I think it's a tuning problem. Because I think I disagree with Wordup in that changing it at the end of the expansion is a bad thing. I think that's the right time to change it because you can see what people have been doing, and then you can change based on that information, like the Nyalotha Affix. But if people are just skipping them, then it's a problem that they should make them more attractive.
The
I think it's probably
Affix was very, very different in terms of what allowed you to shape up the routes, though, because that allowed you to drop in one place and drop out wherever you wanted.
I agree wholeheartedly that the Nyloth Affix was just better in basically every way in terms of like how you navigate around the dungeon. The Affix was incredible. But I think that this is a direction more towards that than the other affixes we had this expansion.
I think to that point, it kind of depends on what we want, right? Like, do players want dungeons to change significantly, their routes to change significantly, or do they want it? Like, I think it depends. Do you view Mythic Plus as a chore, or do you view it as fun content, right? Because I think some of us that are in the raiding community, they're like, okay, got to get my new IQD, new patch, right? Or new Soul-Letting Ruby, new patch, right? And Mythic Plus to those kinds of people could be considered a chore. And then I can see where Wordup's coming from, where it's like, okay, yeah, maybe don't rock the boat too much. On the other hand, in Legion, I love doing Mythic Plus. I did it all the time as like a main form of content. And so I guess, like, in my opinion, I'd love for them to make me like dungeons that much again. And I think an Affix has the potential to do that. And this one I think could. I think what we're saying is it just needs a bit more work.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, it's not that I don't want them to rock the boat. I'm like really on board with them doing that. I think that doing it at the beginning, when everything was like everywhere, might have made it so people engage with it more if it's not engaging right now. But I think this is like main form content for a lot of people. So they need to make it so that it's different. It needs to be tangibly different this season, especially in the last season. Because last season is the one that they remember next expansion. They don't remember the ones.
I think they could probably also, now that this is super related, but I think it kind of sucks that our seasons are attached to the raid. I'm sure PvPers probably agree with this as well, right? Like, why is the raid really schedule determining when we get new affixes or balance changes to dungeons or, things like that? Having only 3 affixes, fun affixes that change an expansion is kind of lame. Wish we had more.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, definitely not.
Also, other problems with the affix, by the way, because, like, for instance, you go to Mists, not a single relic in the labyrinth. You go to Spires, when you go left or whether you go right, there's not a single relic there either.
Oh, and sorry, in the maze, there's nothing? There's
nothing in the maze. Not a single relic in the maze. So you spend 15 minutes without playing the affix.
Yeah, that sucks. Was Prideful in the maze? I forget.
Yes.
Yeah, you could trigger Prideful wherever you wanted, and you got
one in the labyrinth. Yeah.
That seems like the dungeon design has led them down the path of being forced to not put it there because there's variance in where you could go, which is by design their own mistake.
And I guess, and also you have to kill the pack, right? Which is like in the maze, like you literally have no choice. You can't skip it.
This would be the case where if I was on the dev team, I would actually make one of the changes that top Mythic Plus players have suggested multiple times already, which is to allow the gates in the labyrinth to be opened even while in combat. So you can check them in combat, and if you want to double, triple, quadruple pill, you can. Just go ham, basically.
Yeah. No, they should do that. I agree wholeheartedly. That would be a significant improvement to the dungeon. Also, in Spires, Spires going left or right. I feel like they could just like mimic the placement on left and right, and it wouldn't be a problem because you're not going to go left and right. So I'm not sure why they haven't just done that. They're not limited on the number of relics they can put in a dungeon.
It's because the packs are different and the layout is different.
And the counts are different, right?
Yeah. Like, left has mostly stealth mobs and just 1 Goliath, basically. And I think it's 3 squad leaders in total.
Yeah.
And right side has a double Goliath and a couple of other, like, pointless mobs. Right side is so much easier than left.
Following. Yeah. And lots of worms.
Yeah, but you're never going to go both sides, so they can judge the placement on the right side differently to the left side based on like what they
put the same number. There would be massive value in, for instance, like if you go right side, after you're done with the double Goliath, you have a bunch of snake mobs, and then you take the angel teleport to a pack of 5, I think. Pack of 5 mobs, like a spear thrower and a couple of other things, in preparation for the pool where people normally just double, spear, and throw all cooldowns on it. It would be really good to have a relic just before that, like on the pack of 5 while going up the stairs.
Well, I think that's what we were saying earlier, is that like if players could choose when they get the buff for the relic, this problem kind of goes away, right? Because then placement is not irrelevant, but then people can plan for bad parts of the dungeon in advance, right? Not because right now they have to plan for the 10 seconds after they kill it. kill a mob, right? It'd be nice if we could do it whenever.
It would fix quite a lot of the other things that you said there, where because what's happening is they're placing it on the pack to make sure that you will get impact after. So where the pack is more dependent than what the pack contains.
It's a good point.
It has to lead into something. Whereas if it's activatable, you can make it so that the fairly easy throwaway packs that you don't care that much about, they can be made more difficult because there's room to, without needing to put it on the packs that already like plow you into the dirt when you pull them.
And you can incentivize people to kill a different pack rather than punishing them for not, if that makes sense. Because right now you're effectively, punished by doing what we would call a normal route. But if they flip-flopped it and do what we're saying, then killing an extra pack or going out of your way in a route to get a buff is now an incentive, not a kind of requirement/punishment. Which should be fun.
Mm-hmm. So basically a bit like kind of similar in idea to there's one Torghast power that allows you to basically nerf yourself for a floor. And if you manage, you get a ton of power the next floor afterwards. So the same thing, but pack by pack, basically.
Yeah, somewhat, yeah.
Yeah.
Which I don't know, I think can be fun. And again, it could be a choice that, our group is saying, hey, we know this pack in particular in 5 minutes is going to be a pain in the butt. What can we do now in advance to prep for that, right? I think that is a fun choice.
Yep, yeah. Absolutely. That would work really well as well. Like you kill an easy pack for the relic, for the stealth relic, and then it allows you to skip it. Or you kill it for the haste buff, and it allows you to have lust during it, basically. Like, it would be so much better while being fundamentally the same affix, just done slightly differently.
All it would do is it massively increases the way that you can use the affix to solve problems and puzzle solve through a dungeon, and also directly make you engage with the affix rather than the affix just sort of being there.
Yeah, which it might make dungeons easier, right, with what you're saying.
But it'll make them a whole lot more interesting.
Yeah. And who cares if they're easier? That just means you can push keys higher, which is fun, right?
This content has to last
because of that.
This content has to last for quite a while, and if you've got all of that variance, or someone can come up with a wacky route by doing something like that, and there's the potential that it sits there for a while before someone finds it. That's really cool. It's not like say right now it's very reminiscent of Beguiling, which was kind of solved quite quickly.
Yeah. What?
They hated it.
They had to start shifting up the positions or changing which ones were there each week, because otherwise it was solved and it was boring and no one liked it. Compared to like how good Awakened was, where people came up with wild strategies with that months in.
There's something else as well that needs to be dealt with. The relics and the mobs give 0%.
I don't know if that's actually a huge issue. Have any of the other mobs that we've had given percent in M+ affixes? Which ones?
Didn't the infested ones?
The infested mobs were just regular mobs, though. It wasn't.
Yeah.
The Nihilotha mobs did.
The Awakened did.
Yeah.
Pretty sure.
Did Awakened?
Yeah, I think so.
Beguiling didn't, but
Beguiling didn't.
Beguiling didn't, and that's why everybody skipped as many.
And Pride obviously didn't either.
Yeah, but that also got skipped. There is a trend there. Whenever an affix mob is worth 0%, people inevitably skip it.
Unless the buff is so overwhelmingly good. And these buffs are not even in the same stratosphere of power as Prideful was, and people still skipped Prideful, which is an indicator for how strong the buffs need to be.
I mean, I think skipping isn't inherently a bad thing, right? If it's a choice that you're making, I guess, on from key to key basis.
The issue becomes when it's optimal always to skip it.
Yeah, but I think that's where changing the attitude of making these buffs an incentive rather than a punishment, right? Yeah. I think just thinking about it in that way, because the reason they skipped Prideful was because it was punishing to not skip it, right?
The biggest thing is make people engage with the affix. Don't make their primary engagement avoiding it, I think is what makes the best affixes.
How do you balance something like that for low keys and high keys, though? Because, on low keys, Prideful was whatever. You spawn Prideful, nobody had to blow cooldowns on it. Life was good. On high keys, you typically had to blow 2 or 3 DPS cooldowns on it, and the healer cooldown. And you came out with a pocket lust, but nobody with cooldowns to be able to execute on it. Well,
a controversial opinion would be, you don't if it's unbalanced on higher keys, well, that's what you sign up for when you start doing higher keys. Sometimes things are a bit of a mess because that's how high keys are, and that's part of the fun. That's what people like. They like solving unsolvable problems.
Yep,
that's
they want
what
a meaningful
engages the
choice.
people. That's what engages the people who do high end keys. So you don't need to care if it's balanced. They'll find a way probably, and if they can't find a way, then
they'll
keep trying and eventually give up.
Or skip it. Yeah.
Yeah, but like that's fine. Like if that behavior is okay, like this is one of the really toxic parts of Prideful. It required you to basically just turn around 3 times on yourself, jump off, invis, shroud, skip, whatever
Go
you
alliance.
could, in order to not get the pride in combat. Like if the pride mob spawned and you could then engage it at your leisure, there would have been some interesting strats there as well.
I think if everyone is skipping it, then they have a huge problem, and it should be like the tuning should be looked at.
Yep.
But
Do you think this affix will affect Tazavesh M plus much?
Yes.
A lot.
yes.
Imagine how Tazavesh is, man. That would be.
I don't think
clusterfuck.
it's. I don't think they added it as an M plus on PTR yet, have they?
It is available.
Yeah. Yeah.
Next,
It's,
mentioning
Really cool stuff you can do on there. Like for instance, upper Tazavesh is really difficult in Mythic Plus, but that's because normal Tazavesh is really difficult.
especially on Tyrannical.
Last boss of Tyrannical Tazavesh on +10 right now is a 7-minute fight.
Oh, wow! What the fuck?
Yeah. It's not very fun, but the second boss of that wing, the dude where you have to collect the collars, actually gets really fun with the new Affix. Because you get to kill the mini boss thing, like the thing from the Affix, during the transition. So you kill it, you get lost just as the boss comes back, and then you explode the boss. It's pretty fun.
Speaking of Celia, though, the Celia's trinket's going to be pretty spicy for everyone, by the way. So hope you like running that dungeon.
Oh yeah.
mentioning Tazavesh is like it rolls back to what you said about how frustrating it must be to have everything tied to when the raid releases, because Tazavesh realistically was good to go for Mythic Plus.
Yeah, I agree.
months ago, and there's no reason it shouldn't have been, because
So aggravating. I'm so mad they didn't do it.
we're a solid year and a half into this expansion, and there's been no new dungeon for people who run Mythic Plus at all. This could have been there 6 months ago.
Yeah. And it should have
Because now you're going to get however long this patch goes. That's the only time you play with it. At least with, say, Mechagon, we got it right, like slam in the middle of BFA, and then immediately there's 2 new dungeons. Yeah, Karazhan was the second patch.
Yeah.
Was with Tomb. So,
but it was equally dumb then, right? Like I didn't understand waiting then either. To like play it in Mythic Plus, you know, like.
I'll be completely honest with you. It's a good thing that they waited, but it's not a good thing that they did nothing with the time. Because I don't know if you remember the 90% nerfs to Cathedral and Seat.
Right. Yeah. But
okay.
I mean, it's only a problem if they don't, react to their game being, and needing to buff it or nerf things, right?
Exactly.
Like, if they leave it alone, then sure, I guess you have to wait. But like, if they just released it and did an active role in tuning it, it's fine.
And it's probably going to be the same thing once we get Tazavesh. I mean, if you have 7-minute fight on the last boss on Tyrannical, I mean, shit, man, that's more than a Mythic boss now.
That's not even the hardest part of Upper Tazavesh. The real problem is the second boss on that wing, because they didn't change the mechanic.
Oh boy.
So for those who didn't do it, during the transition on Hillbrand, there's a middle console and there's 4 consoles on the side of the room. And you have to have somebody go to the middle console, press it, and they see a set of colors that they need to relay to the group, because the group cannot see them. And then those people need to pick up the thing in the middle of the room that is the right color and put it in the right console, and you wipe if you don't.
Mechatorch or whatever it is again, basically.
Yeah, it's
similar to
hard mode
Mechatorch,
Mechatorch. Except that this time, if you do a +2 with casuals, you will still deplete your key.
The bug world is going to suffer.
Wasn't this a
bad
hard
over
mode
there.
mechanic?
No, on Hillbrand, the hard mode stuns you for 10 seconds if you press the wrong console.
Okay, I was actually gonna ask.
You still have to do it.
Does the M plus keep the hard mode mechanics in, or okay?
No. But like the Tazavesh hard mode mechanics are almost all of them a joke. Because like the first boss would never be active on Mythic Plus anyway, because you can't trigger the thing that allows you to trigger the hard mode, and what the hard mode is on the first boss is the restricted area because the trash is still there. It itself has no real additional mechanics other than the mini trash mob that you have to kill before it being active in combat. The second boss, like the bazaar thing, is fundamentally the same fight. It's just that you get 5 named NPCs instead of 5 trash mobs. The bazaar, everything spawns faster. Big fucking deal. The fourth boss is where things get interesting because you need 2 kicks instead of 1. But again, it's fundamentally the same. Hilbrand, the console stun you, but the real problem with clicking the wrong console is you drop the collar that you're carrying and it goes back to the middle. So whether you're stunned or not makes no difference.
Yeah.
And they probably just don't have data from this, right? Because like how
nobody
many people
runs it.
Well, I think mount collectors are running it, and that's probably it.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, but even with that, like they don't even properly run it because those things don't show up in Mythic 0. Like Hilbrand on normal mode, we blasted it before he even did the transition.
Just to roll back slightly about like Tazavesh being released, and not to harp on Shadowlands, even though that's exactly what I'm about to do, and praise Legion. Like Legion's the Mythic Plus expansion that everyone tends to sort of glorify. I think everyone can agree. Most people will call back to Legion was great. Legion had 8 launch dungeons and 4 over the course of the expansion. Like in trickle feed, there was a new dungeon pretty consistent. And that was very enjoyed. I think that's great for a Mythic Plus player. BFA had, I believe it was 10 at launch, and it got 2. So there's 12 total between 2 of them. And Shadowlands got 8 at launch, and we're getting 2 at the very end. So it's by far and away the least content-rich Mythic Plus season, and like that's acutely visible when you look at how solved dungeons are now.
I mean, and I think to that point, I don't necessarily need more dungeons, but I would appreciate better quality over quantity sometimes, and I don't know if we got that even this time either.
I don't think it's the volume. I think it's the like trickle feeding in 1 every 6 months. 1 every year at least, so that it feels like each season's got an extra bit of texture.
Well, and again, we only had 3 seasons, so if we had more seasons, part of that could be solved as well, right? Like Tazavesh, they probably wanted to give it, a patch worth of gap in between releasing it and making it Mythic Plus. They probably didn't expect the patch gap was going to be this long, though, when they were planning it.
Yeah, that's fair.
There's another thing that they could do, and I don't know about you guys, but I had a lot of fun when I could get into Legion Time Walking Mythic Plus. So, some of the dungeons were actually spectacularly fun, and also the seasonal affix that they built for it really, really, really was fun. And like I thought they would be crap at the start, and I was proven wrong. But the fact that it lasted for so little time, and also that it didn't count for Mythic Plus score, so as a result, most people did not do it. Because the gear was weak, and there was no other reason to do it. So, like, people just gravitated to either Vault of the Wardens for that couple of good trinkets, or just going for regular Mythic Plus. And as a result, you looked into Group Finder, and there was, 3 keys? If instead they took the 8 dungeons that we have today, and they added 2 Legion dungeons like that to the season, as in counting for score and everything.
Oh, that'd be cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, season 3, here's Vault of the Wardens, or whatever, or
they could do
here's Freehold, or whatever.
They could do a rotational thing, which each season, bring in different dungeons from the past. That would be really cool. I think we talked about really this. Fun. I think in the first episode a little bit when we're touching on Legion Time Walking. It's such a wasted opportunity with all the dungeons released in the past.
I think this goes back to what Pulbik mentioned. So I guess in for a penny, in for a pound. Is that how that goes? The content of WoW is clearly seasonal, and it revolves around the raids. And I think the Mythic Plus was amazing when it was added in Legion, but I don't think it was adapted properly to how content is, because right now every season you get 10 extra bosses, but you don't get 10 extra dungeon bosses or anything like that. So clearly the dungeon Mythic Plus scene has to be addressed, and I think, and you guys might be able to clarify this a little bit more. But I think the Legion Mythic Plus is a good way to add Mythic Plus content with every patch, whether it is 2 dungeons every like 3 months and like 4 per patch, or then we get another expansion or whatever, or keep adding dungeon. But I feel like the Mythic Plus scene content doesn't progress the same way as the raid content is. I'm still doing the same dungeons. Oh, I get 200 crit from this Tormentor, and that's about it. It doesn't feel like it's fresh new stuff, although the Mythic Plus content was good, and it still is good as a concept. I don't feel like they're iterating it, at it properly. Do you guys think like more Legion dungeons, M plus being added like every season or every half season, or do you think they should even dive into BFA dungeons eventually if they go down this path?
Yeah, absolutely should. But there's a deeper and more interesting thing like this. So BFA dungeons and Shadowlands dungeons, we were told that they were designed for Mythic Plus. And yet, the Legion dungeons, which were just an experiment, like they took on challenge mode dungeons and they tried going, well, what if we make them repeatable with harder and harder mechanics? And it failed miserably on some things. Like there are some bosses that were just ridiculous. But one of the things where it worked is that even with that, most of the dungeons were non-linear. You could do things however you wanted. There's only one dungeon, which was Upper Karazhan, where you sort of did not have a choice. All the rest, you could pull pretty much whatever you wanted. Some were harder, some were easier, but whatever. And it allowed you to change your routes depending on what happened. We had no seasonal dungeon in Legion, seasonal affix in Legion, and yet it's the expansion with the biggest variance in routes that we've seen.
Yeah, dungeon design is huge, right? Which I think, to your point, right? Like, if we started rotating in some of the old favorites from BFA and Legion, like I think that could help some of those issues.
That's one part, but they need to go back to the drawing board on how they design dungeons and actually make like big open dungeons. Like not the kind of stuff where.
I refuse to believe, given the scope of the raids that they do, they don't have the resources to create more, like a couple more little dungeons over the course of an expansion. And those things, if you have a new season and there's one new dungeon, that's all it takes for that season to be instantly memorable, because you've got the 8 dungeons that you already do, you'll go in and you'll do it with the new seasonal fix, you'll work it out and you'll do it just like you always did. If you've got a new dungeon, that's new routes to work out, new mobs to juggle, new affix to deal with as well. That makes that dungeon a new puzzle. Right now, people are doing the same puzzle, but slightly different. It's like it's a new Wordle for the day. Like, it's not particularly fresh, but a new dungeon is immediately. And obviously, the cheap way of doing that is bring back Legion and BFA, but I can't see why they can't just throw a little bit of resources into throwing the dungeon in for the patch,
could do both.
just like they did in Legion.
Yeah.
There's no reason not to do both, because like they fit different purposes. Having a new dungeon means that everybody gets to have fun.
Yeah.
Throwing an old dungeon into the cycle means that people who have done this dungeon before will get to reminisce. That's a really strong thing as well.
And they
or you didn't play in BFA or Legion, right?
Yeah.
But then you have fun because the dungeon's new to you.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I think it's good for everyone.
And they proved they can do it, right? We had the time walking event with the Mythic Plus dungeons from Legion, so it can be made happen. That's proof right there. I think Panthea wanted to say something regarding this, or was I mistaken here?
Yeah, so something that I'd personally really like from kind of Mythic Plus is leaning a bit more into challenge modes and potentially just having a challenge mode setting for dungeons so that you have a different way to explore the dungeons. Maybe potentially tie portals to that and put cosmetics on +20 instead.
Yeah.
Make people want to do a very restrictive mode templated because you're scaled down to a certain item level, and it reinvigorates the dungeon as well.
I think it'd be cool.
It's fairly evergreen as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
that generates communities. Like
the door is wide open, right? If you have more seasons, you can iterate with things more often. Maybe put tier sets into Mythic Plus that are season based, right? I mean, they have a lot of options that they could do to experiment.
I would also really like them to, rather than trying to hotfix or kill strategies, to lean into them and potentially take the ideas from them. Like the best example is Temple of Sethralis in BFA, where people figured out that you can get to the last boss, and as long as you keep it in combat, everybody gets 90-something% DR. So the goal was to get to the last boss as quickly as possible, and then do the dungeon in reverse.
Yeah.
Spinning the dungeon on its head like that, deliberately, can be fun.
It is cool, yeah.
Yeah.
See, one thing that I'm amused with is how many times over the course of Shadowlands have there been really long scenarios in the campaign, or like as part of a patch build-up?
Way too many times.
How many of those could have just been a dungeon that they threw in and then made use of? Like, take you've got the one at the start of 9.1 where you go and stop Sylvanas in Ardenwood. That could have been a dungeon. You have the
Korthia campaign.
You've got the Korthia campaign. Easily throw that in. You could have got the one where Tyrande for the Night Fate campaign goes into Torghast. Easily could have been a dungeon instead of a scenario, and then you reuse that scenario content because you instead of just doing it on your own, you do it with 5 people on normal. It's easy. But it becomes evergreen Mythic Plus content afterwards.
I'm really surprised you didn't get like a Torghast Violet Hold type thing. I was really looking forward to that.
I think they've been given the feedback too many times by casuals who don't want to group with others that they should be able to do at least the mandatory parts of the game on their own. And I think that might be the driving decision behind all those one-player scenarios.
I will say then to invoke the name, they should just copy what Final Fantasy did and let you go and cube for it on your own and have
with NPCs replace
them.
Yep. Yeah.
There you go. And then you completely free up that issue because
which they kind of done before, right? With like artifact weapon quest lines.
Exactly.
Like the healer ones and tank ones, I think, had like parties, right?
The Mage Tower is a prime example for the healer.
Mage Tower, right? Yeah.
Like just do that, and then you can repurpose content that probably took quite a while to build and just turn it into a dungeon.
Or they could just keep the scenario single player focus and then just make a parallel dungeon that just replays that story or those encounters, but this time it's a 5-man party with bosses have more HP, more damage, and so on and so forth. It doesn't just have to be a choice where I get to choose that or not. They can just let's copy paste this, add 1 or 2 packs here, increase the boss's health, and you can have a dungeon.
Exactly.
I mean, the biggest part of the assets that are being done for this kind of stuff is the map, which you're going to reuse, the mobs that you're going to reuse, and maybe some of the abilities that are generic anyway. Like, all the stuff is there. It just needs probably some playtesting and some tweaking around to turn it into a dungeon.
And the amount of extra content that would generate from a Mythic Plus point of view is enormous. Like, you just need to come up with some silly names for the items that they drop, and there you go, problem solved.
Yep.
Seems like a no-brainer. They should definitely introduce more dungeons across the expansion. They have a lot of things that they could easily turn into dungeons.
They've dipped into this Mythic Plus concept pretty heavily, and it seems like it's paying off. Obviously, they didn't think it might, which is probably why they thought it was a one-shot back in Legion. But it's been proven for 4 years now that it's okay. People like it. I guess in a way, treat it as you would treat a raid. Just add more HCs and just make it fresh, or it's a whole thing on its own.
Oh yeah. But let's move on to one of Panthea's favorite topics. Not only Panthea's, but he's really prevalent on this. The 9.2 raid, Sepulchre of the First Ones. We have a couple of things to talk about. Pretty, I would say, smooth but brutal segue into the next topic. Fuck it.
Kick in the door.
Yeah. So let's just kick it off. Panthea, first thoughts on what you tested so far. How general opinions on mechanics, things like that, tuning and all sorts. So, what is it with the Sepulchre? Is it good? Is it bad? Anything?
Yeah, I think it's shaping up to be a pretty nice raid. A lot of single target focus, I found, with priority targets and stuff. The raid bosses themselves seem to have a definite flex for Blizzard's way of just making up a name and using that as a boss name. I'm not sure how you're meant to pronounce a couple of these boss names. They are not actual words.
Well, we had a list. Hold on.
Well, it's the spider, the scorpion,
I've
the
renamed
robot.
a few bosses.
You don't like Dorsegni?
Dorsegni, I just call sausage.
Yeah, everyone does.
Hope it catches on, man. Let's do the sausage tonight.
But I saw the Feral Druid with a thumbs up there when he heard, a lot of single target stuff because,
Yeah, I'm a big fan.
Yeah, of course you are. Right. Oh, look at that. So, yeah, battery, sausage, beautiful. Halondrous.
Yeah, we've only been able to test 8 out of 11 bosses. Blizzard seem to intentionally be holding the last 3 bosses hostage so that we can't test them, but they look to have a lot of interesting mechanics on them. One of them very Among Us, where the raid turns into imposters and you need to find the actual one.
Pretty cool.
Name's looking a little sus over there.
I have very little faith that fight is going to be good.
Oh yeah, same. I reckon it's going to be automated by week 1.
Yeah.
That fight, there is some info floating around in spell data about how that works. And yeah, it's looking like it's not going to be fun. And it's looking like it's going to kill a lot of groups, particularly normal and LFR groups, because the mechanic is present on every difficulty.
I have been digging in the spell data and the texture files for any kind of clue. I can see that there's 3 different colors, not sure what they're associated with, but one of them is probably the one that we're going to have to kill.
It'll make Reddit insufferable for a good solid month.
But like comparing it to Sanctum of Domination right now, from what you tested so far, does it feel better in terms of like, I don't know, mechanics, visuals, all of that?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, there is a lot of reused hexagon platforms in the raid, which will get a bit samey, but in terms of how the bosses are, there's enough variance in between each of the bosses. It's not just all of this is like single target, oh, here's an ad every minute. There's a good enough variance. So, the first boss is loads and loads of trash, and then you get the boss come out, completely different mechanics from there on.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sanctum, you can't really, I mean, I don't know, I'm tired of walking into that raid, so I'm down for anything new at this point.
A lot of people are at this point for sure.
I think it's more thematically cohesive than Sanctum was, just like from A to Z in there. It looks different, but is obviously the same things.
Yeah, I think a lot
on
of...
a boss per boss.
For sure. I think part of the attrition in Sanctum was because it did have this, dare I say, Torghasty vibe, because we're basically there and everybody was just fed fucking up with that place. I think
it was that everything looked really similar.
Yeah.
Aside from Painsmith's room, everything was lots of skulls, lots of spikes.
Yeah.
Gray,
sadness.
lots of blue. And
well, it's
like my childhood.
Basically all we've been looking at this entire expansion, yeah. Also, Sanctum has Sylvanas, which is maybe the worst boss fight they've created in a hot minute. So
yeah,
anything is going to be better, if I'm going to be frank.
But it did have
me. But
one thing I really noticed in Sepulchre, I don't know whether Panthea would agree, but I definitely did this. They've leaned even further into what Sanctum did, where the boss arenas are enormous.
Oh, yeah.
And there is a lot of moving going on, but not necessarily like all over the place, but there's a lot of telegraphed things on the ground or things to avoid, and you will move quite a long way between them. And they're quite grand in the scope of how big the arena looks when something's going on.
Yeah,
definitely agree. Some of those bosses do have certain ways of like making you move around the room. So prototype Pantheon, one of the bosses will just go out of the combat arena and push you with winds to the other side of the room. So that kind of handles that movement aspect. On Battery, one of the ads you kill does explode and knock you back. So that punts you from one side to the other.
I think
for any guild recruiters out there, that if you don't have a warlock, get at least one.
Yeah, we've never heard that in any tier before.
I think the way that they're so open is such a breath of fresh air from the very few fights that I have seen and been in. It's so refreshing. This is like opening the window after like a weekend of being closed up. It's nice to have like open doors and like all open, because it felt so.
What, you felt close to Pulbik in the Sylvanas fight for some reason?
In the fucking Sanctum, man.
Sylvana was open there. No.
They seem to be more willing to make.
No.
They seem to be more willing to make the environment part of the encounter than they were in Sanctum. Which I have to wonder, is that because they got such good feedback from Painsmith that.
Or Sylvanas Phase 2, right?
They didn't get good feedback. That they realized that like that's part of the character of the boss as well. Like if you look at Halondrus, that the room and the pathing that it does, even though it's not a very popular boss right now, is like part of the encounter. The same for Lehuvum.
Yeah, I'll just call it battery.
Battery. It's definitely not from what me and Flame tested earlier on. It's definitely, at least at first impression, a breath of fresh air. The change of imagery and feeling and all of that, which is very welcome. I'm pretty sure most of the people who raid are sick and tired at this point. You know, you're reclearing, you're doing it on also whatever. It gets tiresome. At least from a visual perspective, it does look more natural, open,
vibrant, alive.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's a good thing. Are there like any specific issues, like big ones you've encountered so far, Panthea, with which you're testing? Some bosses? Or?
Yeah, bosses keep changing. But that's also a good thing, because it means that you get a little bit of insight into the design iterative process on what they're intending the boss to be, because we'll test it, we'll sometimes kill it, and probably the boss is a bit too easy, and then you check the dungeon journal a week later, dungeon mechanics completely changed. So then the next test is a completely different boss, which is also nice and refreshing from testing, because you're not doing the same boss again.
Yeah.
And there's also just brand new mechanics on quite a few of these fights as well. So you're not going into the boss trying to say, oh, this mechanic is like this one. It's actually just brand new, and you're just explaining how to do it.
Yeah, that just goes to show that they're maybe a bit more focused on it than in the past, doing all of these changes. What I noticed
from the heroic tests especially, because those were the ones I did the most of, they were actively tweaking things mid-test, which they have done before on a few bosses here or there, but they were doing it like very quickly, like within 10-15 minutes of the boss. This isn't working, or this is a problem. We're going to immediately tweak it and make it work, or remove or retune it like on the spot, and then it's changed, and you still got another 40 minutes to carry on the boss. Whereas in like Sanctum, there were a few cases where like in the last 10 minutes something got changed, and you don't get to really check it or do anything with it. All you know is it's changed.
It definitely feels like they're taking a way more iterative approach to 9.2 in general. Like, they've been iterating over tier sets the entire patch, now encounter design and loot drops as well. I mean, which is all great to see, by the way. This is a big change compared to what we've seen
it's all
across the expansion. So I think the loot especially.
It was much more clear that someone was watching the tests this time. Like, there was someone actively had a hand in it. Because the last time that I remember that being done, aside from like the occasional times where the tests completely explode, was the Legion Alpha, where there was like very clearly someone actively watching tests go on and trying to make things stop breaking when they did.
There's also been some item changes as a result of testing as well. So the Fate Scribe tank trinket no longer acts as an ank. It's now just another cheat death. Because you could cheese so many mechanics with that trinket.
I mean, yeah, and that was always going to happen once they introduced that. I think it was something they had to change.
So they didn't want another Sanctum where you just die with every tank mechanic, so you didn't have to actually deal with it.
If they didn't change it, it would have showed up in future expansions as well, for sure.
Yeah,
like it was a broken mechanic, and like it was a cool concept, but it was a good thing they changed it.
Did it manage to break a mechanic in its own tier? It explains everything about it.
Yeah.
So for any tanks out there, you should farm the Fate Scribe trinket now. It is a stronger version of Alar with a shorter cooldown.
Bro, nobody wants to be doing Fate Scribe at this point. Don't make me do this.
That is exactly what my raiders said, but I said, no, I need Fate Scribe trinket on 2 more tanks.
I'm just not telling our tank has changed.
Yeah, but I think overall...
Tanknotes.com?
Tanknotes.com, yeah.
Doubt it.
No, but seriously, I think Public underlined it very, very clearly. It is a bunch of many good things this time around. And, some people in the past kind of like commented or hinted that, we're so negative, or we know this is, we're too much complaining, too much criticizing. Listen, y'all, what we discussed over here and what the folks have talked about is basically, pointing out maybe not always the obvious, but always giving out the solution. And also when there's things that is like really good, they're actively listening, iterating on stuff. This is good. And like if we can do one thing with these kind of podcasts, it's like, okay, let's just give them their, high fives and boys, this is a good path you're on right now. Not to mention the fucking communicating. I cannot stress this enough. The blue posts that have been popping up recently.
Shout out to Scarazard.
Yeah, definitely. Scarazard, MVP, man.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah,
That man is fucking smurfing.
Yes. But this is so much different than what we kind of got used to in the last 2 expansions. So it's definitely a change. Hopefully it will stick. I'm still a bit skeptical for the long run, but so far so good. So we have to give him praise where praise is due, even, with the current issues.
Like 9.2 is just generally speaking has very clearly been one that they are. When it released, it wasn't looking any more finished than 9.1 did on the PTR. But the pace at which it has been iterated, but considering that there was a big Christmas gap in between and everything else going on, has been iterated on like really aggressively in really good ways with actual back and forth. Obviously, there's still a question mark as whether the last 3 bosses will work, which is always a worry, but hopefully they do. And so I'm genuinely looking forward to this patch much more than I was 9.1.
Do we know
For sure.
Do we know if the last 3 bosses will be testable at all?
No.
It's very unlikely.
That's part of what's going to be fun, right? Like the race to world first should be quite exciting, I think, because of it. I'm really, as a viewer and a raider, I think that'll be fun.
Yeah. I mean, we're not even going to have an idea from Heroic. It's going to be genuinely fresh.
I agree and I disagree at the same time. The reason I would agree is because, it's something you can't prepare. You can't even do much other than see the dungeon journal. But we have the problem with the race to world first of the second legendary that's going to likely drop.
Yeah.
Debbie Downer over here. We didn't need to talk about it.
I can't believe you brought that chestnut up because that is not a good one. That's the only big not good going into 9.2.
I mean, but they are, to that point though, they are iterating on when we acquire the double legendary. It was originally rep gated. Now it's behind the campaign. I think now what people are saying is that it's happening late enough into the patch where, for the most part, the raid's going to be cleared on Mythic before they get their double legendary, which is kind of a disappointment, I think, for both the players in the race to world first, as well as just viewer. They're not going to be able to effectively play their class at its highest peak for the last raid of the expansion, which is kind of lame. For the rest of us, that aren't in that caliber, we'll get it week 3 of Mythic. Is that right?
Yeah, we'll get it when we're basically less than halfway through the bosses, I think.
I think there's issues to be raised there about tuning of bosses.
Yep.
I'll say that on this whole thing, there's the legendary tuning, but on this whole, I'll avoid the most cynical takes that you can have, but I think the absolute peak best place to make sure, to give it to everyone, is the second week of the patch launch.
Yep,
I agree.
And I don't think there's any other place where it fits better.
I agree.
No one's going to remember, I got second legendary 5th week, and this was the most crowning achievement of the patch. All they're going to remember is, I didn't have 2 legendaries before it now, and now I have 2 legendaries. It doesn't matter where it comes. All they remember is the before and after. The second week gives you an incentive to log in on the second week of the patch, because the raid's probably going to be 2 weeks out from the patch launch, from as far as I understand.
It's 1 week out.
Are you sure?
Yeah, they said that Zereth Mortis opens and then the following week it's the raid. They said that in the blue post ages ago. But they can always
they have a whole weird schedule. I think to that point though, we're going to be losing Shards of Domination, right? And that's up to 17-18% player power, just gone walking into the new zone and the new raid. And I think the best way one of the best ways they can counteract that, right, is you get double Legos as soon as you walk into the new raid. It's not going to make up the difference for most specs, but that coupled with tier sets, should at least make it not feel like you're losing damage going into the next tier, which I think is going to be really important. And I think if they can move double Legos to second week, third week, whatever it is, to counter that, I think it'd be healthier for the player base.
There's another thing that probably needs to bear consideration on that is so suppose you're a raider and you're in a good enough guild that you're going to get to roughly close to the end of the raid when the second Lego drops. What do you play for the first 5 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever it is?
Because for some specs, it's going to be weird. Yeah.
Yeah, like if you know that you will hit the bottleneck when you get your second Lego, it might actually be better to play something that you know will hyperscale at that point because of the second Lego's player power.
Well, luckily, we're not getting new renown levels, right? So there is no downside. Like, you're not investing time into like one covenant or something like that. But you could be investing in, crafting costs or upgrading your current Lego or whatever. That might change your decision, right? So yeah, it's going to make everything kind of messy for the first couple of weeks, which I just don't think is valuable.
Yeah, all it does is create resentment because, like, suppose you're one of these classes that are currently not very good, but will hyperscale with the second legendary. Like, suppose you're a Guardian Druid. Right now, you have a choice between the legendary or the Kyrian one. Later on, you will be able to have both and just basically turbocharge yourself. Do you play the nerfed version of your spec for 4 weeks and then grin and bear it? Or, like, I'm with Wordup on this one. It would make so much more sense to start the tier with the legendary.
Yeah, and if you're not starting tier at legendary, you should get it Mythic Week.
Yep.
I mean, Mythic Week makes a lot of sense as well. Like, you can tune Mythic for 2 legendaries, which is a huge concern of mine. It's going to be tuned for 1 legendary for World First, and then 2 legendaries is going to trivialize every boss, so I'm going to be DPS stopping constantly.
And what does that even mean, right? Because like 2 legendaries for Feral Druid is very different than 2 legendaries for Mage or Shadow Priest or whatever, right? Like, the balancing is already kind of out the wazoo, right? And especially, and I think we mentioned this last podcast, we don't need to harp on it too much, but balance between Covenant legendaries especially is wild for some specs. So I would prefer them kind of out the gate, just say, yeah, here it is. We acknowledge there are balancing problems with legendaries. So in that name, we're just going to give it to you, right?
What worries me the most about it is that there are, and it's not like a super common thing, but there are some classes where the Covenant, like the double legendary thing, is not just like build enabling, it's damage profile enabling, where not having them means that you can't deal with certain encounters that you otherwise would be able to once you get it. And it's going to lead to potentially some really frustrating things of, well, I can't do this fight this week because I'm just useless, but next week we'll be fine. Do we just, like, I don't know, go and do splits and like AFK till next week when we get it and we'll be really strong?
Yeah, man. We don't have our single target nuke spec until next week. It's just like back in BFA. We don't have our Demon Hunter for Chaos Brand, so we don't raid.
And I think in the blue post they mentioned they wanted to like delay the power throughout the patch, which I just think is just kind of a weird take on it, especially when we know it's probably going to last for a year and a half, So like, what's the harm in making it happen 2 weeks earlier than they currently have it,
They should just race it out and give people as much like instant excitement as possible to get back in and want to jump into the raid, and open up as much options as you can, so it's like a wild environment rather than one that just like trickle feeds in. Yeah. Mostly because, like, I mean, from a selfish point of view, as an officer, I can already picture the situations where someone says, can we just like skip a few days this week and come back next week and do an extra day because we're going to be way stronger then, so we don't have to like bash our head against the wall. Yep. Just like in Sanctum, that already happened. Can we come back next week when we've got shards and upgraded them?
Or like as a Discord admin for like all the class Discords, or whatever, or writing guides, it's going to be a pain in the butt because people are going to say like, oh, I want to be Necrolord because with double Lego in the tier set, it's the best. And then they have to scroll down to the bottom of the guide. We're like, oh yeah, by the way, the first 3 weeks or 4 weeks of the patch, when you don't have double Legos, you actually need to be this Covenant with this Lego. And everyone's going to either look over that or look at it wrong, whatever. It's going to be a massive, confusion and communication problem.
I think at this point, like Public mentioned, the patch is probably going to run for around a year, if not longer than a year. And the trickling in content for like a few, like 1 or 2 months of the patch is just weird because this is all a part of their current, or let's say hopefully past way of designing content with enforcing engagement metrics by, wiggling the carrot on a stick in front of you so you just need to wait 1 more week to get that one thing and then 2 more weeks to get that other thing. I think they should just bite the bullet and say, okay, this is just an alt patch. After 2 or 3 months, you're going to do whatever, you're going to finish the content, you're just going to play it on an alt, like corruptions were kind of, although, begrudgingly added to a vendor. And after they were added to a vendor, it made it a lot more accessible. Personally, I found myself playing a lot more alt, so I wonder how that alt plays with all that corruptions. And I feel like they should just put their eggs in this one basket and say, okay, people are just going to play alts. Let's just give them the double legendary. It already will feel weird dropping the shard power that we have. So I don't know.
I mean, it's I think they're really late on schedule as well with everything. I think this whole being very, very off their schedule started in BFA and it has become worse and worse in Shadowlands. I mean, there's a point to be made about engagement metrics and shit like that. But at this point, I strongly believe like everybody's like all hands on deck, as we can probably see with all of the iteration and the communication on it. I just feel they are late with the schedule. It's basically it. They either don't have enough people, or it's just the fact of, COVID and all of the issues that happened over that Blizzard and during the summer and all that, the lawsuits, all of that delayed a lot, the development. So I can see it at least for a year, this patch being holding on. But hey, we have Tazavesh.
There are plenty of solutions to be able to handle this. Like, without going into full boomer mode, we had Ruby Sanctum back in Wrath of the Lich King.
Oh, yeah.
That basically solved this in a way.
Sure, yeah.
We had one of the longest expansions to date at that point. Like, the 3.3 lasted, well over 10 months, I think? 10 or 11 months? Yeah, they dropped a raid halfway through it. Like, just recycled mobs. 100% recycled mobs. Some very cool mechanics that allowed them to test the engine for Cataclysm, because the whole phasing stuff was brand new at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And not even that. I want to say, if I were to give you like my pie in the sky dream thing they did, is whatever the next expansion is, you're going to have however many dungeons in that expansion. Why not just grab one of those and a little bit of the intro quest and pull it back, or like a couple of bosses, and throw that into like a end of expansion wrap up, lead into next expansion.
That's what they did in Warlords. Was it Warlords? No, mop into Warlords with the Upper Blackrock Spire and shit.
Yeah, just pull a bit forward, stick that in, and have it be like the interim patch that leads to the expansion, gets people excited for the next expansion, and breaks up the current monotony of whatever's going on from like an extended end patch.
Yeah, think of like a mini raid, like, I don't know, was Crucible of Storms? That was pretty good. Like in between patches, was it 8.25 or 8.15?
So 8.15.
8.5, something small.
Crucible was good for the 4 people that cleared it.
It was released.
Just the idea of it.
People were still progressing.
POD,
And it was like, I've just got out of one progress, I'm not going to go into another.
Yeah.
The thing is that the dungeon that they would pull forward, they've already done in like the case that I gave there.
Yeah,
it's going to be the next expansion one. So what harm does it do to drag it forward a little bit? And it gets people immediately engaged with whatever's coming next, because this is supposed to be like the end of the expansion, the end of the story, done.
We'll likely get them on alpha, like probably midway through this year anyway. So just quickly test them on alpha and then throw them on live.
Have we had a 6.25 patch? I don't remember if it was just 6.2 or 6.25. Because if the patch
Warlords mid end of Warlords, I don't think so.
Because it feels like, if the patch is going to run for like a year, they could essentially have like a 9.25 where they could, I don't know, unlock all of the restrictions like they normally do.
I'm pretty sure they will have a 9.25.
Yeah, or like add something to do an event, maybe unlimited time walking for Legion.
Mage Tower?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe they can, 2 expansions later, make a Mage Tower available all the time again.
It's things like you could forgo doing like a full-on pre-patch and instead pull the dungeon forward and have that last for 3 months instead of for 2 weeks.
Yep.
Like the scenario in Theramon, which was the lead up to, was it Mop?
Yep. It was Mop, yeah.
And you had all of that content there for a while. Just do something like that. Get people into the new expansion, because you're going to need to now, right? Because this is supposed to be a closed book of a story. You need to immediately drag them into whatever's coming next without just like the box art.
well, hopefully some of them will listen to this. I think there's a plethora of great ideas flowing around on these shows. And I gotta say, it was another awesome talk and chat. I think we can shortly wrap it up here. And I'm saying this just for the risk of things changing once again, and we post this shit on Monday, and by the time this is going live, everything we talked about may be already resolved or shit, right?
Yeah, it's currently Thursday the 27th, so take this with a grain of salt.
Too much
at 7:35 p.m. Be careful, there might be a PTR bill in.
Yeah, exactly. but
it's today's newspaper.
Nevertheless, I think the ideas and the solutions and the things the folks came up with are legit, especially when it comes to, like, the keeping the Mythic Plus scene fresh, keeping the latest patch fresh, having all sorts of ideas and things. And the crazy thing is, a lot of the solutions partly have been proven they could work in the past. For example, we talked about the Mythic Plus rotation stuff from previous expansions. I think that's amazing to be drawn in. But not going to drag it on for too long. Thank you once again, Guiltyas, Pulbik, Mandl, Panthea, and Wordup. A pleasure talking with you, gents, as always. And thank everybody for watching or listening, depending where you're getting this content on. And also check the links in the description on the YouTube videos for all the boys. There's Twitch TV over there, there's YouTube, there's Discords, all of that. And we shall see you all when, Flame?
Well, when the next episode is going to be recorded, things with the PTR right now are crazy. Everything happens so quick, so it's kind of hard to make a theoretical discussion about anything without having it be debunked half a week later. But we're gonna do our best to get many more things to talk about.
Wait. So we have a break-in from Panthea. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video.
Oh yeah, follow me on Twitter.
Follow me on Twitter.
Bye, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classic or retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.